Hi, I just wanted to do a little introduction. It's my first time making videos or anything or creating an audiobook, so I'm sorry if it all sounds a bit clumsy. Please let me know any feedback you have or if there's anything you'd like me to change. Also, it's actually my first time ever reading out Heist Baby, so I'll be discovering it as I read it for you guys, if anyone watches them. That is, and thank you if you do. With all that being said, I hope you enjoy listening, and I'm sorry if I make any mistakes or pronounce anything wrong. I'm sure I will. But yeah, thank you and enjoy. Art Heist Baby by OTRTBS. Sorry if I say that wrong. Chapter 1, Small Bills. James Potter just likes to think that he's down on his luck. It happens to everyone at some point, right? Down on your luck sounds better than directionless, on the verge of overdrawing your bank account, jobless 23-year-old. At least that's what he tells himself as he shuffles quickly into the little coffee shop on the corner, rubbing his hands together rapidly to warm them up. The little bell chimes, announcing his entrance, and his glasses immediately fog up due to the rapid change in temperature. The scent of coffee brewing is a welcomed one, and James closes his eyes, inhaling deeply and letting the roasted warm smell comfort him in its familiarity. He can hear gentle music playing somewhere from the hidden speakers in the shop, adding to the ambience of the warm little shop. Look, I hate to be this person because I love seeing you in here every day, I do, the barista begins wryly from the other side of the counter. But I'm afraid Melting Cup Cafe and Bakery is bleeding you dry money-wise. Remus, James opens his eyes and quickly clears the fog on his glasses with his shirt before putting them back on. He greets the barista with his best and faltering smile. You have my usual? Remus sighs and turns around before placing a large cup on the counter next to the register. Steam wafts from the little hole in the lid, and James feels his caffeine headache melt away just looking at it. That's £4.09, Remus replies flatly, ringing him up. James ignores the pointed look as he begins fumbling in his pockets looking for his wallet. Ah, he says when he finally finds it, pulling it out and paying. I almost feel that ethically I cannot keep selling you coffee when you have no money and no job. Remus shakes his head in a last-ditch attempt to get James to see reason as James takes his first sip. I am working on the job part, James grins reassuredly. One of these days I'm going to be a millionaire and buy my own coffee shop, and then you won't see me in here anymore at all, and wouldn't that be sad? You were on track to being a millionaire at that banking job you had before you quit. Remus's eyes shoot up as he looks at his friend. I didn't feel bad about selling you coffee every day when you weren't there. James takes a minute to blink away the sting of that comment. Remus always thought it was a terrible impulse decision for James to quit one job without having another one lined up. You are lucky we are friends, Remus Lupin, otherwise I might even be angry at you for bringing that up. James warns as Remus holds his hands up in surrender. I'm going to sit over there. James nods at an empty table in the corner. Actually, the entire cafe was empty this early in the morning. James always got there a little before opening, and because Remus was fond of him, he would let James in early. Remus claimed it was out of the goodness of his heart, but James secretly suspected Remus was lonely opening the shop all by himself. He had been coming to get coffee from this little place on the corner for almost 3 years now. For 2.5 of those years, he would come in, order the same double latte every morning, talk to Remus for a few minutes, and then head off to his incredibly boring, insanely mundane, soul-killing bank job. Over the years, James and Remus developed a friendship that both of them thoroughly enjoyed. That friendship led into after-work dinner and drinks, and soon Remus considered James one of his best mates. James liked Remus. He was dependable, quietly observant, and incredibly intelligent. He was always ready with a quick quip or a sharp remark that James found entertaining. James admired Remus's quiet intelligence and the way it seemed to intimidate those around him. Most of all, James admired Remus's determination and independence. Remus worked at the cafe to put himself through school. He was working on his second master's degree and called himself a perpetual student, always voracious for knowledge, longing to know, to learn. To study things was to understand them. There was a power in that. And Remus liked James, despite himself. At first glance, James seemed the arrogant, selfish, douchey type. He sauntered into the cafe in his way too expensive and perfectly tailored suit on the way to his banking job, and Remus was determined to hate him. However, his plan was quickly foiled as soon as James opened his mouth to speak. He was exceedingly kind and patient, tipped well, and took a genuine interest in Remus as a person by asking him all kinds of questions about himself. Soon Remus found his warmth endearing and his optimistic outlook on life a little addicting. Nice music, James snorts as he pulls out his laptop, starting it up, while a twangy acoustic guitar melody droned on. Listen, if it was up to me, there'd be nothing but Bowie playing in here, but the owner, Arthur Weasley, came in one day when I wasn't expecting it, and 'tis a pity she was a whore was playing, and now I'm only allowed to play instrumentals, Remus calls back, making a coffee for himself before the morning rush came in. James lets out a little laugh before turning his full attention to his computer. In the last 6 months, this had become a new routine of his. Instead of getting his coffee and rushing off to the bank, he now got his coffee and sits at a table searching for jobs and making Remus's life a little more difficult. In all honesty, he was on track to making an ungodly amount of money at the bank. He was up for promotion in a few months and would be made head financial analyst in a year or so, but he had never hated anything more. Every day he wore the same thing, sat in the same office, talked to the same clients, read from the same script, made the same promises. There was no excitement, no action, no fun. James desperately missed having fun. All that awaited him at that job were long hours and fluorescent lights that gave him migraines. He would have gone crazy if he had to spend the rest of his life there doing that same job every day on a loop. The loop had to be ended. And to Remus's credit, it was an impulsive decision for James to quit in the middle of a conference meeting. One minute he was clicking his pen mindlessly, feeling his brain rotting inside his skull from lack of stimulation, and the next he was packing his things and walking out the door muttering a quick, "I quit," behind his back. It felt good in the moment. James was flooded with absolute relief and excitement about the endless possibilities of the future, but that was 6 months ago. Now James was desperately low on funds to pay for his flat, his groceries, and his daily caffeine intake. The only good thing about his old banking job was that it provided a comfortability James had gotten used to. He had money to buy lavish and extreme gifts for his friends whenever he felt like it. He could pay for everyone's dinner and buy them rounds of drinks at the bar. And he loved doing it. These days, he could only afford a diet of pot noodles. Perhaps Remus had a point. Any other person would be reasonably scared. Any sensible, realistic person would realise the trouble the impending financial doom would cause, but not James. He fully subscribed to the belief that money comes and goes, and right now it was simply just gone, but it would come again. Sure, he was down on his luck, he had been for 6 months, but something fortunate was bound to happen soon. Until then, he searched relentlessly for jobs online, but nothing seemed suited for him. James was well qualified for accounting, banking, business, trade, and finance jobs. He had gone to university, excelled in all of his classes, and understood the intricacies of the market almost better than anyone, but all of the jobs in his field bored him to death. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake in choosing that path of education for himself. It was easy, too easy for him. He wanted a challenge. In school, he was interested in sports and partying more than anything, and never stopped to think about the day when he would have to get serious about his life. He never imagined himself living past 21 if he was being completely honest with himself, and now that he had, he wished he hadn't picked finance to study. Any of the other jobs that didn't focus on business and finance paid criminally low salaries. Even as optimistic as James was, he knew it wouldn't be enough for him to get by. What he really wanted was a job willing to pay him millions to use his finance degree in an exciting way. He wanted a job that got his heart pumping and his adrenaline coursing, but mixing danger with finance seemed impossible. It didn't stop James from looking, though. He had been quietly working at that little wooden table for a few hours, filling out application after application, responding to rejection emails from companies letting him know they decided to go in a different direction, when a man walked in that caught his eye. He was lanky and wore a shrewd expression. Everything about him screamed intrigue, from the dark sunglasses covering his eyes in winter to his all-black ensemble. The man looked out of place for the Melting Cup Cafe. He moved as if he was trying not to draw any attention to himself at all. His face was set in quiet determination, and he slipped in among a large oncoming crowd, stapled something to the corkboard at the front of the shop, and slipped out without a word. James looked at the place he was for a few moments after he left, his eyebrows furrowed in slight confusion and curiosity, before he gets up to examine the paper the stranger had put up on the board. There were several flyers already tacked up haphazardly. Some advertised odd jobs like lawn mowing and gardening services, dog walkers and babysitters. Other flyers promoted local bands and businesses or events going on around the area. However, the paper he was interested in was stapled right in the middle of the board in bold capital letters. It read, "Lucrative job opportunity, potential to make money. Take a number and call for more info." Incredibly vague and yet entirely interesting, James rips off a contact number at the bottom of the flyer and sticks it in his pocket before turning to Remus. He tries to ignore how fast his heart is beating. "What do you know about that guy who just walked in here and put this up?" Remus shrugs. "Nothing. All kinds of people put flyers up there, but if it looks too good to be true, it usually is." He returns to making coffee for the line of people in the shop. James stares at the flyer a few moments longer, hoping it will magically reveal its secrets, before he returns to his table to pack up his things. "Bye, Remus. See you," James calls, walking to the door. Remus looks up from the register and gives him a wave. "I'll text you," James says, as the bell chimes for him the second time that day, announcing his exit. James walks quickly back to his flat, partially because of the cold, and partially because he feels a slip of paper burning a hole through his pocket. He isn't sure why he has such a good feeling about this, but as soon as he saw the man place the flyer up, he felt it calling to him, daring him to investigate. This was it. This was the job he'd been looking for. This was his luck turning around. He could feel it. He set his things down as soon as he gets home, kicking off his shoes and sitting on the couch as he pulls out the piece of paper with a phone number on it. He punches in the numbers and listens as the line rings. Once, twice. "Hello?" A rough voice comes through the other end of the phone, and James sits up straighter. Hello." James pauses briefly to gather himself. "My name is James Potter. I'm calling about the flyer you posted in the cafe about an hour ago." Silence. "For the lucrative job opportunity, I'd like to apply," James continued, a little unnerved. "That was quick. Well, I'm a seize-the-moment kind of person. Was it you who put the flyer up?" "No," the man on the end of the line snorts. James can hear clicking noises in the background as if the man was typing something into a computer, and he feels a strange sensation that this is a test of some sort. "I'm going to ask you some questions to determine if you're what we're looking for. This isn't an interview. This is to determine if you'll get an interview. Is that clear?" The man sounded harsh but bored. James imagines him to be around his own age based on the sound of his voice, and pictures him with a stern, heavy brow. He's definitely scowling and smoking a cigar. "Yes, that's clear," James responds, his voice wiry and thin. "State your name and age, please." "James Potter, 23. The sound of clicking keys ensued over the phone line. "Would you consider yourself to be a nice guy, James?" "Sure, I'd like to think so." A derisive snort and more clicking. "And why did you call this number?" I need a job." Clearly, the man's voice comes out flat and unimpressed. James has a feeling he is losing this job interview, if that was possible. Pre-interview, he corrects himself in his head. "I was sick of my old job. I want something exciting, something daring. I don't want to be stuck doing the same thing every day for the rest of my life. I want action. I want a life free from boredom." James expands boldly. He felt nervous about that answer, considering he knew nothing about this job, and it could very well be another cubicle office job. "Would you consider yourself a brave person, James?" "Absolutely," he responds resolutely. James was no stranger to bravery. He never cried getting jabs at the doctor's office when he was a kid. He'd always be the first to climb the trees, or to speak up in class, or to say something when he noticed an injustice. He confronted the monsters under his bed himself. More clicking. "How would you feel a job that requires travel? Any family depending on you?" "No," James takes a steadying breath in. "I'm kind of on my own at the moment. I don't mind travelling. I've always wanted to go to Brazil." "And what did you do before, job-wise, that is?" "I was a financial analyst and advisor at Crockett's banking and financial firm." The clicking on the other end of the line stopped. "So you've had experience in banking, finance, marketing, trade, creating offshore accounts and things of that nature?" "Sure," James replies happily, glad that the man on the other end at the other end of the line seemed more interested. "I'm great with all that stuff. Always have been. I can move money, track markets, analyse data, you name it." "Can you hold for one moment, please, James?" the voice asks after a minute of stiff silence. "Sure." Just as soon as he says yes, hold music comes blaring through the phone, and James sits patiently listening to the saxophone melody. He thinks about the strangeness of this phone call. He has no idea what this job is, what it entails, or even the name of the man on the other end of the line. Instead of feeling sceptical about these details, he feels exhilarated. "Hello, am I speaking to James Potter?" A different voice comes through the other speaker, a softer voice that sounded slightly French. It sounded beautiful, and James feels his breath hitch in his throat at the sound. Yes, he gulps, trying to recover. He doesn't know how he knows it, but he knows this person was important. He was the boss, at least the boss of that other guy James had previously spoken to over the phone. "I've told you know about money, financial institutions, the market." The voice spoke again. It was cool and careful. "What do you know about money laundering?" "Well, there are many ways to do it," James supplies, willing to tell the man on the other end of the line anything he wants. "Structuring, where you break up cash into smaller chunks to avoid reporting requirements. There's trade-based laundering, which involves under or overvaluing invoices, shell companies, round-tripping, black salaries, bulk cash smuggling, all sorts of ways to launder money these days, each increasingly hard to track, but I assure you, I am very well trained and I know how to spot all the telltale signs and protect your company or companies from being targets of money laundering if that is a concern of yours." Silence. "Nothing gets past me. I'm very thorough," James continues. "I know a lot about other financial institutions, foreign markets, things of that nature. I was on track to becoming the youngest head financial analyst at Crockett's before I quit." "Why did you quit?" James pauses for a moment, trying to consider if he should tell this man the truth. He really wants to make it to the interview portion, if at the very least, to see the person behind the voice. "I was bored. I needed something more than a desk job. Doesn't matter how nice the desk is." There was a long pause, and James wonders if the line has suddenly gone dead without him realising. "Are you available to come in tomorrow for an interview?" the man speaks at last. "Yes." James breathes quickly, feeling a flood of excitement and relief in him at once. "Do you have a pen and paper? I'm going to give you an address and time." James jumps up quickly, running to grab a pen, as he uses one of the overdue notices he's received recently as scratch paper. Quickly, he jots down the information. What is that job for? Or about, if you don't mind me asking? I'm still not sure what I'm interviewing for. Do I need to bring my resume with me? A cover letter? Also, I didn't catch your name or the company name. The flyer details were sparse." "They were sparse for a reason. I'll see you tomorrow, James, if you do well enough. Then I'll tell you more about the job. But there's no need to tell you anything unless I'm sure you'll be the right fit for us," the man explains briskly. "But I'm sure we could have a great use for you here. You sound promising." "Can I at least get your name?" James asks, sounding rather desperate. "I feel like I'm floundering in the dark here." "Regulus," the voice answers shortly. "See you tomorrow." The line goes dead. James puts his phone down and immediately grabs his laptop. He types in Regulus into the search bar and goes through hundreds of articles, social media profiles, and even blog posts to no avail. He wastes fruitless hours none the wiser. He can't do much with a first name, no matter how unique it is. In fact, he has learned a great deal about astronomy from the name Regulus, a lot about the star, but nothing at all about the person. Regulus, he thinks to himself. It was a beautiful name, an interesting name. For the first time in his life, James understands Remus's need to learn, his desire to always know more, his incessant curiosity. James wants to know everything about Regulus, who he is, what he does, what he likes, and why he has the star's name. Any normal person wouldn't go to the interview tomorrow. Any sensible person would be sketched out by the mysterious and vague nature of the job position. But James wasn't just anyone. James was on the hunt for adventure, and this seemed like the perfect place to start. Regulus, he thinks to himself again, and again, and again, until the sun sets and he clambers into bed, almost too anxious about his job interview and meeting this mysterious Regulus to fall asleep. Almost. When he finally does fall asleep, he dreams of constellations and shooting stars, deep forests and grey skies. Art Heist Baby by OTRTBS, Chapter 2. Welcome to the team. Author's note. Trigger warning guns, not fired, just used as intimidation. Gonna add the warning anyway. The next morning is grey and desolate. It's drizzling just enough to wet your clothes and your face, but not enough to be immediately obvious when looking outside. The bell to the coffee shop chimes, and Remus shakes his head without looking up from the countertop he was wiping down. "James, good morning." He looks up to see James standing in front of him and freezes for a moment. "Okay, what is this? What does this mean?" Remus gestures to James's perfectly tailored suit, looking as if he's been transported back to 6 months ago. James fiddles nervously with the cufflinks on his sleeves. "I have a job interview this morning," he explains, feeling his heartbeat pick up at the prospect. "I could really use some coffee to calm the nerves." "An interview? That's great, James." Remus gives him a genuine smile before turning around to make his drink. "Where is it? What's the job for?" I'm not sure," James answers honestly, feeling a little sheepish. Remus tosses him a disbelieving look over his shoulder and frowns slightly. "I answered that flyer that was put up yesterday, and they're being very secretive about the whole thing. The address they gave me for their interview is a bit far out too. I tried to look it up, but it was more of a warehouse than a legitimate business." James glances at the flyer board and sees that 2 other numbers have been taken from the ad. "Oh my god, James, you cannot be serious. They're going to kill you. You're going to get murdered and wind up on some true crime podcast." Remus scoffs, and James is sure he sees Remus's eye twitch. "And serves you right, for just showing up to a warehouse based on an anonymous coffee shop ad. You can't go." "I am going, though. I had a pre-interview yesterday over the phone, and I passed it." "You can't pass an interview," Remus interrupts flatly. "Don't go. What if it's dangerous?" "I think you can, because I did. Anyway, I know it seems sketchy, but I feel like I have to go. Something is telling me this is what I've been waiting for." "You need to call me when you get there and when you leave. If I don't hear from you in 3 hours, I'm sending the police after you," Remus sighs, knowing it is virtually impossible to change James's mind once it was set on something. He places James's coffee down on the counter. "This one's on the house, for good luck. Plus, it might be the last coffee you ever drink, so I figure I might as well give it to you." James grins before grabbing the warm cup. "Thank you, Remus. If I die, bury me in this suit, okay? Text me as soon as you get there. I mean it," Remus calls after him sternly as James makes his way to the car. Driving was not one of James's strongest suits. He could drive if he really needed to, but he preferred walking and was often known to laud the joys of public transportation, and not because he didn't know how to parallel park. He puts the address into the GPS and curses slightly to himself as he drives through towns and winding roads, sipping on his coffee, which was getting colder by the minute. He drives in silence that morning and nervously rehearses his answers to typical interview questions in his head. He conjures up images of what Regulus looks like, each one not doing justice to the voice on the other end of the phone line. When he finally arrives at the address he was given, he parks on the dirt road and sits there for a moment. For the first time since answering that ad, James has a terrible suspicion that this has been an elaborate prank. James loves pranks, but only when he was the one pulling them off, not so much when he was on the receiving end of them. The warehouse looks abandoned. It stands against the green countryside as an ugly, seemingly forgotten chunk of metal. There was no way a legitimate business could be run out of this. Determined to get to the bottom of it, and putting his bravery at the forefront of his mind, James sent a quick text to Remus letting him know he's arrived. He knocks on the metal door and listens to it rattle. It swings open moments later to reveal a man a little shorter than James. He eyes James up and down and stands to one side, gesturing for James to come in. If the outside of the warehouse was unpromising, the inside was the complete opposite. There were thousands of pounds worth of equipment, computers and makeshift office spaces, chairs and rugs scattered in various places, files stacked haphazardly in cabinets. The space was a welcome warmth from the outside cold and lit in hazy yellowish lights instead of the bright fluorescent ones James was used to. "Regulus wants to interview you himself, so," the man says, beginning to move to the back of the warehouse while James trails behind him, taking everything in. "You sit here and wait." He points to a tufted chair, and James takes a seat. "Nice suit," the man scoffs. "You come from money or something?" James looks down at his suit before looking back up at the man. He was dressed in very casual attire. "Well, I wasn't sure what kind of job this was, so I figured it best to come overdressed." The man nods curtly. He seems bored, and James could tell by his voice that he was the one who had first interviewed him the day before. "What is this job? You're not going to kill me or anything, are you?" James speaks after a few moments of silence. He tries to cut the joke with a smile, but he feels the unease slowly creeping its way up his spine. No plans on murder for the present, the man responds shortly, not smiling at James's joke. He sits in silence, wanting to ask a million questions, but knowing that the man standing in front of him, observing him quietly, won't say anything. He begins bouncing his leg nervously. "Hello?" A voice causes him to snap his head up quickly. "I'm Regulus. You must be James." James's imagination couldn't have done Regulus justice in any universe. Of course he was named after a star. He was ethereal. He was pale and lanky, but he had dark hair that hung in curls about his face. His eyes were the kind of green that teetered on grey, and he was dressed more professionally than the other man. James was aware that he was staring and springs into action quickly. He stands up and takes Regulus's outstretched hand to shake. "Yes, I'm James. Hi," he breathes out rather softly. Regulus's hands were smaller than his and cold. The metal of his silver ring sent a slight chill through James, and he notices a particular ring in the shape of a snake, with 2 emerald green jewels for eyes sitting on his thumb. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. "Sorry about the mess. This isn't where we would be operating out of if you get the job. This is just temporary." James quickly realises that Regulus has already started walking, and he hurries to catch up. "We're putting together a team, and this was the most convenient place to set up for a few weeks." Regulus leads him to a computer and pulls the chair out for James to sit. He obliges. "I hope you don't mind, but this part of the interview is a practical session. I have some things I need you to work through here. Don't worry, they're all simulated, so if you fuck up, you won't get the job. But you won't irrevocably destroy everything, either." His slight French accent goes straight to James's head, and he tries to focus on the instructions Regulus is giving him. But his heart is beating so fast, being in such close proximity to someone so like him. James blinks a few times to clear his thoughts, and then begins working on the tasks on the screen. There were a lot of financial accounts set up in different locations, international banking times, banking flags that needed to be cleared, and accounts that needed to be moved or hidden. James does it all, everything Regulus asks of him without thinking, without hardly breathing. After solving one particularly difficult task, Regulus leans in, looking at the screen with such rapt awe, he doesn't even notice James gulp at their closeness. Regulus smelled like Earl Grey tea and amber, and James was intoxicated. "Incredible," Regulus murmurs, as James desperately tries to keep the blush from rising to his cheeks. When he's finished with the tasks assigned to him, James spins around in the chair to look at Regulus, who's standing behind him quietly. He was in a white button-down shirt with the first few buttons undone, and James imagined unbuttoning all of them right there. "Well, James," Regulus jogs a chair over to sit across from him, pulling James out of his completely inappropriate thoughts. "You have the job if you want it." "What is the job?" James asks, furrowing his brow slightly. "I don't understand." "What did I just have you do?" Regulus returns, eyeing him keenly. "Another test." James thinks about the tasks he was asked to complete. He goes over each one in his head until it finally clicks. His eyes widen in understanding. "Now you understand the secrecy," Regulus returns with a small smile, also seeing that James has finally understood. 1,000,003 things are running through James's mind, but mainly a large flashing red sign that was alternating between flashing danger and mafia at him. "What do you need me to launder for you? What is the dirty money? Where is it coming from? I don't want to be involved in the drug trade or... "Relax, James," Regulus responds calmly, still eyeing him carefully. He looks as if he was sizing James up, determining quickly if James was a friend or foe. "We're not involved in the drug trade." James feels entirely helpless under his gaze, powerless to move. He wants to sit there and feel trapped under the weight of Regulus's stare for the rest of eternity, to give Regulus everything he ever asked for, even if his brain was screeching at him to leave. "You're extremely talented at what you do. You'd make a valuable addition to the team. We don't work for cartels. We're more of a freelance business focused on fine arts, you see." He speaks slowly, as if he is explaining a matter of great importance to a small child. "I intend to pull off the greatest art heist of the entire century, sell some paintings, and make millions of dollars. I'm assembling a team of highly trained professionals to help me carry out this task. If we're successful, then we'd all be rich beyond belief." James furrows his eyebrows slightly, taking in this information. As slowly as Regulus was saying it, it still took time for James to process through. It was astounding to him that he was sitting across from the most beautiful person he'd ever seen before, a person whose voice alone took his breath away, and he was discussing a crime. A crime that had the potential to land him in jail for a very long time. It was even more astounding to him that he was actually considering it. "Why an art house?" James asked once he realised his Regulus was waiting for him to speak. "I mean, if you want money, why not rob a bank?" The corners of Regulus's mouth turn up slightly, and James feels his heart swell. "Yes, do that. Look at me like that forever." Cliché. Besides, banks are boring. Where's the fun? Where's the excitement in that? Yes, James thinks. Yes, you get it. You understand. But to be in a museum surrounded by works created by an artist's hand, an artist who lived hundreds of years ago, to see what they saw, and then to take it for yourself. Anyone can steal money, but we're stealing pieces of the past, portals to another time. James stares at the boy in wonder and in awe as he listens to him speak. Regulus seems to be lost in thought slightly, his eyes sparkling in anticipation. We're going for the war holes, we're taking back the Banksies and Basquiats. Art is for the people. James smiles at him in his enthusiasm. There was something magic about Regulus. He was sure of it. He was almost certain he's been bewitched. "I have a team of people. If you want the job, you'll meet them all. I'll be working closely with them too. They will be your colleagues, your only friends for the foreseeable future. You would handle a lot of the financial aspects of the job. Foreign markets to sell the artworks, making sure the money is untraceable. The aftermath of the heist. But you'd also be helping with the actual heist itself if needed. If you agree, you would have to follow my rules and instructions. There will be many months of training and classes. You'd leave your home, your life here would be non-existent, and you'd become untraceable. While you were with me, everything would be paid for. Housing, food, and any and all other expenses." James was staring at Regulus intently. He watches as the other boy speaks slowly and methodically, trying to memorise every little detail about him, every curl, every minute expression. "Obviously what we're doing is illegal, and you would be incurring that risk. You would also be extremely wealthy if you follow through with this plan, and I would think that this could be an excellent partnership if you agree." He pauses for a moment. "And while I cannot promise you a life free from finance, I can promise you a job that is never boring, a place of excitement, and a lifetime of adrenaline highs." Regulus seems to be finished with his speech as he laces his ringed fingers together in his lap. James wonders how he can be so calm discussing a crime like this. James had never done anything illegal in his life. While he hasn't always followed the rules set for him in school, he certainly always followed the law. This didn't seem like Regulus's first time dalliance into the world of crime at all. James finally opens his mouth to speak. "And what if I decline this offer?" He hears the gun click before he feels the cold metal on the back of his head, his heart beating rapidly as his mouth goes dry. He hadn't even heard anyone walking behind him. He was too focused on Regulus, too enraptured by the boy sitting in front of him. Now the alarm bells going off in James's mind were more than justified. "Danger, danger." Regulus continues speaking in that calm, unaffected tone. "If you decline, then I'm afraid I'm going to have Evan here shoot you. It's not personal. You would just be a liability, and we can't have that." James was silent, staring at Regulus as Regulus stared back at him, his eyes glinting mischievously. "But something tells me you won't decline, James. Something tells me you're up for the challenge." The metal of the gun was still placed at the back of James's head, heavy and threatening. He's afraid to make any sudden movements, and he sits as still as possible, terrified that even a slight head tilt will cause Evan to pull the trigger. "Say yes, James. It could all be so easy. Just say yes," Regulus taunts. He whispers to him, his eyes challenging James, daring him, like a siren luring him into the jagged rocks of the sea. There weren't very many moments in James's life where he could pinpoint a penultimate frame in a series of decisions. A singular moment where he knew he would be jumping off a metaphorical ledge and into a new unknown, a new chapter. This was one of them, though. He looks at the boy sitting across from him, the beautiful, lovely boy who is ready to steal art to own fragments of the past, and he makes a decision to jump. "Yes, okay, yes," James whispers, still statuesque, still, and he felt the gun fall from the back of his head. James would have said yes without the threat of violence if he was being honest with himself. He would do anything Regulus wanted him to do, go anywhere he wanted him to go, and as brave as James is, that thought alone terrifies him. "Wonderful." Regulus stands, briskly clasping his hands together. "You have a passport?" Yes, I do, yes," James stammers, taken aback by the change of pace as he grapples with the threat to his life. "Keep your phone on you. I'll contact you when I need you. And the address of this place that you wrote down? Burn it. Also, erase it from your GPS. And this goes without saying, but if you tell anyone about this, I will kill you and whoever else you told. Regulus looks so fierce at that moment, James believes every word. He doesn't doubt for a second that Regulus will kill him. He wishes that it scared him more. He wasn't sure why it doesn't. Evan will show you out. And with that, Regulus stalks away, disappearing behind a corner, leaving James to look after him. All right, stand up, pretty boy. Evan, the man who had interviewed him, the man who had invited him in, the man who had just seconds before had a gun to his head, puts a hand on James's shoulder. You said no murder, is all James can think of to say at the moment. He stands anyway to follow Evan. And I stay true to my word. Do you see anyone murdered here? Any brains blown out on the carpet today? No, James returns almost petulantly, trying not to shudder at the thought that it could have been his brains on the carpet. No, so you're welcome. How long have you been working with Regulus? James asks as they approach the front door. Regulus and I go way back to our school days. We were always friends, me and him and Barty. You'll meet Barty soon, I reckon. Regulus has wanted to do this heist for years and years, but we just started seriously working on it about a month ago, Evan shrugs. He seems to be much more agreeable now that he knows James is working on the same side as him. I'm not a criminal, James sputters out. His thoughts were all jumbled and racing through his head now that he was no longer in Regulus's presence and pinned down by his slate-green eyes. Evan lets out a loud laugh. Keep telling yourself that. Though technically I guess you're not. You haven't committed any real crimes. Yet. What are you going to do with all the money? Evan asks. They were stopped at the door. I don't know. James pauses for a moment to think about it. I guess I'm in it more for the thrill of it. Does that sound awful? Money is secondary to excitement. I want to do this to prove that I can. Yeah, I see why Regulus likes you. Evan sighs offhandedly. James tries not to let it go to his head. That's why he's doing it too. Between you and me, Regulus is bloody filthy rich. Inherited everything from his parents. His children's children would never have to work a day in their lives. Regulus just likes proving people wrong, I think. He's obsessed with owning and belonging. Always has been. He's a bit mental. Wants to play God a bit, I think, knowing that he can give and take. James stares at Evan with his mouth slightly agape, filing all this information away in a private folder in his brain labelled Regulus. Personally, I'm going to spend a lot of it on hookers and cocaine. Try my luck in Las Vegas. They call it the City of Sin. That sounds like the place for me. Evan was still talking. Anyway, I'm sure I'll see you around soon. Oh, and hey, Evan reaches around to a filing cabinet and pulls out a manila envelope, handing it to James. This is the stuff Regulus needs from you. Consider it onboarding. Welcome to the team. James nods, clutching the folder tightly to his chest. Before he even realises he's walking, he was back inside his car with the keys in the ignition. He sends a brief text to Remus to let him know he was alive before he pulls off of the dirt road path, making the long drive back to his house. He smiles to himself slightly at the irony of it all. Remus said going to this interview would kill him, and Remus Lupin was never wrong. James thinks back to the gun to his head mere minutes before. He could have been killed. In a way, he's sure that it had actually killed him, at least to some degree. The old James, the law-abiding citizen, was gone, and instead replaced with an unrecognisable man who is willing to put his life in danger for a man he only met once, for a man whose slight smile was enough to make James' world tilt on its axis. Oh, Regulus, James thinks to himself, what fool are you about to make of me? How far will I let you bend me until I break? Outside, James notices the blurring horizon line where green rolling moorland meets the grey turbulent sky. Art Heist Baby, Chapter 3, What the Fuck's in New Hampshire? Cancel all cards and close all of your bank accounts out. Take any money you have out in cash. If you have multiple accounts, close them out over a period of days to avoid drawing attention. Dispose of anything in your flat that will spoil or die. This includes food, plants that need to be watered, and pets. Pack a bag, a small one, with clothes and other effects. Do not bring any personal items that remind you of home. Leave them behind. You will keep your flat. When you arrive, I will help you open new accounts that automatically pay rent every month to avoid suspicion. Bring your cell phone and any other device that friends can use to contact you, along with your passport. If there is anyone in your life who will be concerned with your whereabouts and demand that you see them in person after a few months, then you should meet with them over the next few days and set up some reasons for your impending absence. There are some structured examples of what to say on the back of this sheet. James pores over the sheets and sheets of paper that are contained in the manila envelope. They're scattered across the floor of his flat in neat rows, and he has read the multitude of demands Regulus requires hundreds of times. In fact, he's spent a lot of time running around his flat, packing things up, throwing things out, consulting Regulus's notes, and running around again. Regulus is very meticulous in his instructions. He provides diagrams, fake scripts of possible conversations, packing lists, and various other suggestions. He was, however, less meticulous about the information that James deems most important, like when would Regulus call, when did his job start, where was he going, how long would he be gone. The topic of Remus is another issue entirely. James gets sick even thinking about it. It had been a week since James had gone to the warehouse, and per Regulus's instruction, James was keeping up his same routine, a routine which now included lying horribly to his best friend about not getting the job. James sits in the coffee shop every morning while pretending to fill out job applications and agonises over how to tell Remus that he won't be coming in anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. So far, his plan is to say that he'd be away visiting his parents for a week or two. Remus surely wouldn't find fault in that, and then, after a few weeks have passed, James could write or text, or call if he could manage, and tell Remus he had found a job out of the city and would be away for a while. James feels a little stab in his heart at the thought of not seeing Remus for a while, and feels an acute guilt at the web of lies he knows he's about to spin. The only thing that was getting him through it was the idea that James would come back for him. James would come back for Remus and fund every single degree he wanted to get with all his wealth. Remus wouldn't have to work at all when James was done with this heist. James would pay for him to study literature and classical civilizations and political science and anthropology and anything else Remus wanted to learn. Whether or not Remus would feel comfortable accepting all that money would be another issue entirely, but James would cross that bridge when he got there. When James begins floating the idea of visiting his parents past Remus, he's more than surprised to see that Remus looks almost relieved. "I think that's a brilliant idea, James. I think I might actually go on holiday myself," that's all Remus said. Perhaps he was tired of having James mope about the shop in his jobless state, but had just been too nice to say anything about it. James was trying not to read too much into it. 1 week was quickly becoming 2, and James is once again struck with a foreboding thought that this has been a giant elaborate prank, until his phone begins to buzz in the early hours of the evening. James snatches it up quickly. He's been checking obsessively every couple of minutes since Regulus told him he'd be in contact. He's turned the volume all the way up and never let his phone out of his sight, just in case. It was a text from Remus. "Decided to go on that holiday. I'll tell you loads about it when I get back. Some nice boy named Grant is covering for me in the shop. I think you'll like him. I'll tell him to have your coffee ready when you come in tomorrow." James reads the message and frowns. It seems like a rather sudden time for Remus to just up and leave, especially when he was in the middle of the semester, but a part of James feels slightly relieved that he won't have to account for his own absence for a little while longer. "Don't worry about it, have fun, and take 100 pictures. James responds to the text quickly before putting his phone down and looking around his flat, feeling a sudden surge of emptiness. His phone buzzes again, not even 20 minutes later. While he saw the message was from an unidentified number, James knew who it was instantly. "Black car out front in 10 minutes. Take all your things. Driver's name is Creature." James bolts up instantly, running around his flat and checking to make sure he had everything packed. He looks over Regulus's notes once more, just to make sure he wasn't missing anything, and he contemplates sending a text back to Regulus. He wants to. He really wants to, but he can't think of anything to say that wouldn't sound dorky or ridiculous, so he thinks it's best to leave it alone. The sun is setting outside, and the sky has a slight orange tint to it as James runs outside with his minimal belongings. He pauses for a moment, observing the street before seeing a black car idling a few meters away. James opens the door and slides into the back seat. It smells like cigarettes and coconut lotion. "Sorry," he coughs a bit awkwardly. "Are you Creature?" "Yes," the man answers gruffly, driving off as soon as James closes the door. "Creature, but with an interesting spelling, like a creature, like an animal but not." James begins rambling in the back seat. "It's a nickname," Creature grunts. "Oh, cool, how did you get it?" Silence. James looks out the window. There's no music playing. which makes James more nervous than the fact that he was in a strange car with a strange driver with a strange name about to steal from a museum. "So, creature, where are we headed?" James asked another question, attempting to make conversation and find out any information he could. "The airport." "The airport? Where are we flying to?" "I don't know, I'm just the driver," he says shortly, eyeing James warily in the mirror. "Do you know Regulus well?" "Been with the family for many years. I know all of them." "Right, well, London Heathrow is the other way, so You are not flying commercially?" "A private plane!" James exclaims, his eyes widening. "This is the height of luxury." His first thought was that he'd love to tell Remus about this, and then he felt his mood dampen slightly. He spends the remainder of the car ride in silence, thinking of all the places the plane could take him. If they were going to be stealing art, surely the best places would be Paris or Berlin or Amsterdam maybe. James doesn't know a lot about art. He doesn't know anything about it really, but he always admired artists in general. He admired anyone who could create, anyone who could make something that hadn't existed before. Artists mixing colours and creating scenes that have never been done before. Writers giving words to emotions that everyone feels but can't describe. Musicians creating chords and melodies out of silence. James loved it entirely too much and held on to the idea that it was the creators of the world who would be remembered through their creations. Their books and paintings and music were all signs of humanness, all pockets of creation that stood to defy death. They screamed, "Hey, look at me! I was here once on this earth too. I loved and cried and sang and danced once, just like you. I was here. I was human. Remember me. Remember me." They pull up to a tiny private airport right onto the tarmac. Creature stops next to a jet and looks back at James when he makes no move to get out of the vehicle. "Wait," James says, feeling incredibly nervous all of a sudden. The sun is set by this time, but the lights on the runway and on the tarmac were brighter than ever. "What do I do?" Creature gave him a withering look. "You get out of my car and you get on that plane, now." James gives a quick jump at the harsh tone before grabbing his stuff and exiting the car. He stands at the foot of the steps for a minute. All he was instructed to take with him fit in one hand in a little black bag. What would happen if he just decided to run? What would happen if he changed his mind right now? Would Evan come running off the plane to shoot him? Good luck, James thinks wickedly to himself for a moment. He'd have to have damn near perfect aim to catch him. But ultimately, it isn't the threat of being shot that makes James trudge up the steps of the plane. It is the reward of seeing Regulus again that makes everything worth it. "Going to see your mum then, are you?" James hears a shout from the back of the plane before he can register anything. "Remus?" James stands frozen at the front of the plane looking at the tall, lanky figure of his best friend, standing up from one of the seats in the back. As shocked as James feels, he can't help but grin at the sight of his friend. "How's holiday going then, mate?" James shoots back once he collects his thoughts. Remus opens and closes his mouth indignantly before also breaking into a grin. "You bastard! Pot meets kettle. You took a number from the ad. You took a number. You're here. You're doing this." The questions were fluttering around James's head incessantly. "What are you doing here? What are we doing here?" "I'm sorry, do you two know each other?" The sharp voice of Regulus brought James out of his momentary joy and confusion. "Yeah, we're friends," James answers honestly, looking back and forth from Remus to Regulus. Remus looked very displeased at James revealing this information and glared at him with wide eyes in warning. Regulus didn't seem too happy either based on the swears he starts muttering under his breath, and he suddenly appears to have a massive headache. "Not our fault." James turns to the voice that was now loudly protesting. "Barty vetted that one." Evan points to Remus. "I was in charge of James here. We had no way of knowing they knew each other." Regulus waves his hand dismissively and pinches the bridge of his nose with the other. Everyone seems a little upset, but James is enthralled. He was about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime with his best friend. They were going to make ripples through the entire world. Remus and James, spies, thieves, cultured art men, legend. Stealing the Mona Lisa or something. "James, take a seat, please," Regulus says swiftly. "You're the last to arrive, and we will be departing shortly." James doesn't need to be told twice as he walks through the rows of people. There are large plush leather seats, and each person sits in their own little closed-off alcove for privacy. There are many empty seats to choose from, and James scans the rows as he walks through them. Evan was at the front of the plane, sitting across the aisle from a dark-haired boy with sharp features. James recognises him as the one who stapled the flyer to the coffee shop wall and deduces this name as Barty from Evan's earlier outbursts. Behind them sits a sandy blonde boy. He looks absolutely petrified to be there, as if he wanted the seat to swallow him whole. He lets out a small smile as James passes, which suits his soft features nicely. The seat across from him was empty. James does his best to send him a reassuring grin. In the row behind him, but across the aisle, sits a girl reading a magazine. She has a serious look on her face, and James is struck by her beauty. Her dark hair falls perfectly in tight braids down her shoulders, and she looks entirely too cool to even be sitting on a private plane, which says a lot. Behind her, two girls chatter to each other excitedly from across the aisle. Neither of them seemed nervous or concerned about where they were headed at all. One of them had fiery red hair and freckles. James has to blink a few times to see if she was real. She gives him a wide grin when she notices him pass by, and James returns it brightly. The girl she's talking to has dark brown curly hair that bounces when she laughs, and dark eyes that seem to find humour in everything. James is panicking. Why is everyone so hot? Behind them sits a blonde girl with her hair down in effortless choppy waves. Her nose is upturned, and she eyes James up and down quickly as he passes by. No one is sitting in the aisle across from her either. The seat behind her is empty and located across from Remus, so James takes that one and stores his things quickly. Leave it to Remus to sit in the very back. I read somewhere that you're more likely to survive a plane crash if you sit in the back, Remus whispers, as if he can read James's mind. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but it can't hurt, right? Bully for us then. The blonde girl sitting in front of James turns around to grin at the both of them, her cool exterior disappearing instantly. That means the two henchmen at the front will go down first. You have so much explaining to do, James says, turning to Remus. And I will explain everything, but first, do you have any idea where we're going? James shakes his head. I literally know nothing about anything at all, except that we're going to be bloody rich. Or we might go to prison. I'll drink to that, the blonde girl cuts in again, holding up a glass of champagne. Where did you get that? Remus asks, eyeing the glass. The little shelf on the side of your seat. Click the button and you'll see a little minibar. Remus and James click the button at the same time and grin at each other when the shelf opens to reveal a bar. Why did this not feel like they were about to be thrust into a world of crime? Why was this so enjoyable? You two need to learn how to be more observant and quickly, the girl snorts at the surprised expressions on their faces. I'm McKinnon, Marlene McKinnon. She stares at the two of them, waiting for them to introduce themselves. I'm James, and that's Remus. James gestures between the two of them. A loud cough from the front of the plane causes them all to turn their heads towards the front. Regulus stands in the centre of the aisle, eyeing them all carefully. This is the team I've assembled. Look around closely, because these people will be your only friends, the only ones you can trust for these upcoming months. Things will be made more clear once we get to the house in New Hampshire. We have about a 7-hour flight, so you'll have plenty of time to talk among yourselves and get to know one another. For those of you who don't, he casts a wary glance at James and Remus, all I ask is that you stay in your seats when I take off and land. What the fuck is in New Hampshire? James hears someone mutter. The States? Someone else asks questioningly. Wait, when you take off and land, you're a pilot? The red-headed girl interjects from a few seats up. No, but I am the one flying the plane. At this, a rumble of confusion goes through the aisle. James just stares at Regulus and watches as his eyes flash with amusement. After a moment, Regulus speaks again. Someone has to fly the plane. I won't kill anyone, so don't worry about it. I'm sorry, but I do have a really hard time believing in this no-killing situation. Did anyone else have a gun pointed at them during their job interview? Don't be shy, Marlene interrupts, raising her hand and looking around the plane cabin. A smattering of people raise their hands, including James. And here I thought I was special, James says as he looks around. Marlene turns back and gives him a widest smile. Oh yeah, we're definitely going to be friends. Barty and Evan turn around from their seats, eyes shining in amusement. We are sorry about that, Evan calls down the aisle. No hard feelings, right? Barty adds, grinning like he wasn't sorry at all. Anyway, Regulus cuts in briskly, regaining control of the conversation. Before we take off, I'll need you to place your phones and any other electronics you brought with you in the bucket when I walk down the aisle. I'd like to see him walk down a different aisle, James thinks stupidly to himself before shaking his head. He has got to pull himself together. This man is a criminal, probably, or he's definitely about to be one soon. What are you going to do with our phones? The boy at the front asked quietly. He's probably going to throw them out the plane once we hit 30,000 feet, the girl reading the magazine says flatly as she turns over a gloss page. Can't have anyone known our location now, can we? I'll have them for safekeeping, Regulus responds. No one is throwing anything out of this plane. It's just a necessary precaution. He makes his way down the aisle and the group begins placing their electronics in the plastic bucket. He holds the bucket out to James last, and James looks up at him from his seat, staring a little too long at Regulus. Hi, he breathes out quietly. Regulus seems to be fighting a small smile. Your phone, James. He rattles the bucket with everyone else's electronics, and they tumble together roughly. Right, yeah, here. James drops his phone in and hears it thunk against the other ones. Regulus seems to linger on James just a little bit longer than he does for anyone else. Or maybe James was just imagining it. He couldn't tell for sure. Before James can say anything else, Regulus walks back up the aisle towards the front. Remus looks at him with raised eyebrows and shakes his head while James tries to shrug it off casually. Soon he finds himself engaged in a conversation with Remus about how they had both ended up here. Remus explains to him that he was putting his studies on hold because the coffee shop wasn't paying nearly enough, and Arthur Weasley said they were needing to cut back Remus's hours. He wouldn't be able to sustain his studies and live on a meagre salary any longer, and he was desperate. So he took a number off the ad just shortly after James had. Remus assumed that James didn't pass the interview, and therefore had no inclination of the illegality aspect, and Remus didn't bother to enlighten him for fear that Regulus would make good on his murder threats, hence the lie about going on holiday. I can't believe you agreed to be a criminal, James grins, once they finish debriefing with one another. Remus shrugs. Desperate times call for desperate measures, as they say, and desperate people do desperate things. James almost finds it disturbing that no one here, apart from that one nervous-looking boy at the front, seems to be particularly vexed about what they were going to do. Everyone appears strangely calm and compliant when it comes to committing a heist. In fact, they all seem, to some degree, excited about it. Maybe it's because the general morals of society are in rapid decline when it came to fine art, or maybe it's because Regulus's charisma had charmed all of them, and he had a genuine talent for picking criminally compliant individuals. The plane rumbles to life, taking off and soaring into the sky, and James closes his eyes for a second, knowing that he's putting his life in Regulus's hands. His heart beats excitedly at the thought, and his stomach fills with butterflies. If Regulus wanted to play God like Evan had said, then he could certainly play God with James, who had put his life into Regulus's hands again and again. He would give him the power to give and to take that life, his life. All Regulus had to do was ask. Eventually, Regulus's voice comes crackling over the speaker, telling them that they were free to move about the cabin, which James finds oddly endearing. He wants to go up there and sit with Regulus, to talk to him about how he learned to fly, to tell him when he was little he wanted to be a pilot, because he was always fascinated with flight. He wants to ask Regulus to teach him. He wants to see out of the front of the plane into the vast expanse of sky. Alright, so what have you two been in jail for? Marlene's voice breaks James out of his thoughts. Jail? James repeats. I've never been to jail. I can't say that I have either, Remus responds, eyeing Marlene with curiosity. Why are you here then? You mean to tell me Regulus just hired unprofessionals to do this job? Hey, James scoffs. I never thought not being a felon would make me unprofessional. Remus smiles wryly. Look, Marlene begins, turning backwards in her seat to face them. Her head peeks up over the back of the seat to look at James and Remus as she balances on her knees. Regulus hired me from jail. He paid for my bail and offered me a job. I'm a thief, obviously, and a damn good one too. Marlene was mixing up different minibar alcohols in a little cup and talking distractedly. I've stolen hundreds and thousands in jewellery mostly. Some designer clothes too, I suppose, but it's the diamonds that I really love. Anyway, I got caught because they had alarmed a particular glass jewellery case with a nice emerald necklace in it literally 4 hours before I went to steal it. Can you believe it? My luck. That particular store and that case, I'd done all my research so thoroughly. I knew how to steal that necklace. Oh, I was so mad. But then Regulus shows up like my guardian angel or something and says he has bigger plans for me. So now, here I am on this plane. I'm one of the runners. Remus perks up at this statement. He says I'll be going into the museum, removing the paintings from the frames, and running them out to him. How exciting is that? James pours himself another drink. All throughout this plane, conversations were taking place between the newly found group members. It seems as if other people found their own mini-bars as well. It was like a mixture of sorts, and it made James smile. I'm a runner too, Remus responds finally. Looks like we'll be doing most of our job together then. Great, Marlene mutters, looking put out. Regulus stuck me with someone who's never stolen anything before in his life. And who said I've never stolen anything before? Remus returns, looking at Marlene quizzically. You just said you've never been to jail. Just because I've never been to jail doesn't mean I haven't stolen anything before. I've just never been caught. Remus returns smugly. Besides, I'm more wanted this job because of my precision and my attention to detail. Do you even know the difference between a monet and a manet? No, Marlene admits petulantly, but I assume Regulus would teach me that, or at least have reference photos for me. And I assume your best idea is to cut the canvas out of the frame with a knife for time purposes too, huh? Marlene blinks. And what if it is? James listens to this conversation between them like a tennis match, the ball bouncing back and forth across the net. Face it, McKinnon, Remus shakes his head. We balance each other out. You have the quick hand and I have the sharp mind. We'll be unstoppable together in there. I'm sure Regulus knows that. That's why we're the runners. Point Remus Lupin. Seemingly appeased with this answer, Marlene turns to James. What about you, James? What's Regulus got you doing? I'm handling the financial aspect of things, James answers. Selling these paintings is going to generate a lot of cash flow, and we need a way to manage that without tipping off any financial agencies. Tracking the money is how most white-collar crimes are solved. It's my job to make sure we have open markets for selling and accounts to distribute the money. Oh, a bank frauder and embezzler, Marlene coos, her eyes wide. That's cool. Not an embezzler, a money launderer. Embezzlement is actually something entirely different, James corrects, but Marlene has already moved on. Alright, I'm going to go meet the other people on this plane. Hopefully they're all cool. Imagine being stuck with a dull spoil sport. I don't think anyone who agrees to part of an art heist will be dull, Remus muses, echoing James's thoughts exactly. Mingle, boys, Marlene chides. We're all about to know each other very well around here. So, James and Remus mingle. They stand and walk through the cabin and introduce themselves and tell their stories to everyone and try to find out as much as they can about the other people they are with. They trade their mini bottles of alcohol amongst one another to get rid of the ones they weren't fond of and share the snacks they find in one of the compartments of the armrest. It's through this process that James finds out that in addition to himself, Marlene, Lily and Dorcas all had a gun pulled on them during their interviews. It was for this reason that Marlene had set out to make it known that Barty and Evans sucked and she hated them. Remus, Peter and Mary had gotten through the interview without the threat of a gun to the back of their head, and Barty and Evan were the two holding the guns. The cool girl with the magazine is Dorcas Meadows. She has a serious, no-nonsense attitude that slightly intimidates James. He learns that she was in charge of the technology aspects of the heist. She's tasked with hacking the security cameras, disabling the alarms, and setting up radio chatter and interference. She also has the ability to hack into police scanners and radios and tap cell phones. Dorcas was allegedly incredibly talented in the world of computer science and has only ever been caught once when she was 16, trying to break into the UK student loan government system. Because she was a minor, her record was eventually expunged, and she claims that they had offered her a job upon completion of a computer science degree. Barty and Evan are by far the scariest of the group. They seem tough and hardened by life, and as James was well aware, they have no qualms with wielding guns and potentially killing people. To contrast that harshness, however, they seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company and liked cutting up quite a bit. They found joy in the chaos and delighted in the absurd. They're the security of the operation, the intimidation aspect, the brute force. Remus considered this ironic, as neither of them were particularly built, and they looked more scrappy than well-stocked and sturdy. But hey, he was sure many muscular people were frightened by wielding guns, so what did he know? James considered them a bit of a fail-safe. They were there and only needed if all else went to hell, and he didn't like to think about what their presence on this escapade meant. He was not at all ready to face the potential of violence. He wanted to get in the museum and out with no one the wiser. Similarly, James was also unnerved by the sandy blonde boy who went by Peter. He's a doctor, their doctor, a medically licensed doctor. Well, if you get shot running away, it's not exactly like Regulus can drive you to a hospital to have them remove the bullet now, can he? Peter says, jokingly, but the colour drains from James's face at the thought. That's where I come in, Peter gives him a nervous smile. Again, James files Peter under the same category as Barty and Evan, only useful if everything goes completely and devastatingly wrong. As nervous as he looked in the beginning, Peter did have a calming disposition about him and an ease in his words that James found surprising as well. He expected a shy, stuttering mess, but really Peter was just soft-spoken and not always the best at reading a room, but James didn't mind it too much. Mary and Lily have the most intriguing jobs, in James's opinion. They're artists and conservators. Both of them click instantly due to the love of their profession and their technical capabilities. Their job for the heist is to create the fakes that would replace the original paintings. They are to craft painstaking, meticulous copies of each painting Regulus wanted to steal, and enter the museum directly after Remus and Marlene to rehang the fake paintings on the wall where the real ones used to be. Lily told James all about the intensive process Barty had subjected her to at her interview, seeing if she was able to determine which painting was forged and which one was real based on nothing but photographs, which was apparently incredibly difficult. Everyone chatters excitedly about what they're looking forward to, and everyone had differentiating opinions on Regulus. James finds out through Barty and Evan that his last name is Black. He rolls that name over and over again in his mind. Regulus Black, a guiding star in the Black Night. Peter describes Regulus as terrifying but fair. Marlene and Mary are under the impression that he is incredibly too pretentious for his own good. Dorcas and Remus think that he's some kind of intelligent know-it-all, but in the best way. Lily claims she hasn't been with him long enough to formulate any kind of opinion one way or the other, and Barty and Evan didn't engage in the conversation about their friend. James wasn't sure what he thought of Regulus, other than that he feels general splendour whenever they made eye contact. He knows that Regulus can be terrifying, but it's that terror that excites James to no end. The unpredictable, dangerous nature about Regulus, coupled with his steady and calm mode of speech. His unwavering confidence is as if someone told Regulus he could defy death itself, and Regulus walks around like he believes it. Soon the lights in the cabin dim, and James assumes it's Regulus, suggesting they all get some sleep. He ambles back to his seat, opening the window and looking out at the vastness of the clouds and stars sprinkled across the night sky. If he knew anything about astronomy, he'd look for Regulus's star, but they all appear the same to him. Remus is engaged in some intense conversation with Dorcas about something James can't even begin to comprehend, and he listens to their voices rise and fall. He drifts off into a dreamless sleep shortly after, listening to the sounds of whispered voices filter all throughout the cabin. Art Heist Baby, Chapter 4, So That's What's in New Hampshire. James, get up, James! James's eyelids fluttered open. For a second he stays very still, trying to remember where he is before the events of the previous day flood back to him, and he takes a deep exhale. Remus swats at him again one more time for good measure. We're landing soon, he explains, as soon as James fixes his glasses, which were crooked from sleeping with them on. He looks around for some water, his mouth incredibly dry from the plane, and Remus tossed him a half-full water bottle. Thanks, James mutters hoarsely while taking a drink. Save some for Marlene, she's gonna need it. Remus grins slightly as Marlene lets out a loud snore from the seat in front of James. You didn't sleep? James asks, looking at Remus's dark circles. No, I didn't sleep. Something about being up in the air in a giant metal tube while our pilot, he's not actually a pilot, flies us over the fucking ocean, doesn't do much to calm the nerves and induce sleep. Remus responds shortly, telling James that he's astounded and a little jealous that both he and Marlene had been able to just close their eyes and nod off. Remus wanted to go up and sit with Regulus, not for the same reasons as James, but because he has major control issues. He would be the first to admit it. He wanted to be involved in every process to ensure it went through smoothly. He knew absolutely nothing about how to fly an aeroplane, but he was positive that if he was up there with Regulus, nothing would go wrong. James ignores Remus's sharp remarks and leans over the seat to wake Marlene up, who jolts with a start and nearly punches James in the process. He gives her what's left of the water, and she accepts it gratefully, chugging it all quickly. As soon as they land, a whirlwind of events transpire. They go through customs, show their passports, and fill out declaration forms, all of which set James on edge slightly, but Regulus leads at the front of the group, answering everything with a calm, unbothered ease, and James relaxes some as he tries to do the same. James thinks about how tired he is and how badly he needs to shower as he's shuttled into cars alongside the rest of the group. The cars are similar to the one that picked James up from his flat, a little more spacious with dark tinted windows, and he places his head to the cool window, watching as he's hauled off into the countryside. He's in a car with Remus, Barty and Dorcas. Dorcas sits shotgun next to the driver and spends the majority of the time flipping the radio stations and changing them when advertisements come on or when someone from the back complains. Barty complains the entire time about how he was dying from hunger and about how much he misses Evan, swearing up and down that they were never meant to be separated like this. Remus has his head propped against the cool glass window and is attempting to get some sleep, though James can tell by his furrowed brow that the noise in the car was preventing that. James spends most of his time upset that Regulus isn't riding with him and wondering how the others were faring in their vehicles. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," Dorcas utters when the cars finally slow and stop outside of the house. Not a house, a mansion. They were in the middle of a New England countryside with no signs of civilization anywhere, and amongst the flat and desolate landscape stood a Victorian-style mansion, partially obscured by large trees. James gapes at the sight as Remus laughs in disbelief. They all stand in a little group after getting out of the cars, shuffling awkwardly and kicking up dirt. Their belongings are thrown on the gravel at their feet. Regulus was the last to exit the car, and as soon as he closes the door, the vehicles speed on down the road and out of sight. "This is my house. Our house now, I suppose. It's a bit of a grim old place, from the outside I'm afraid, but the inside is much nicer, I assure you." "This is grim?" Marlene scoffs in disbelief, and Dorcas casts a brief glance at her as she smiles. "Collect your things and follow me," Regulus demands, not mincing his words as the rest of the group follows behind him. He leads them down large corridors that are elaborately decorated and ornate. Each alcove was a feast for the eyes, little paintings and statue busts, old cherry oak and mahogany, walls painted in rich greens, and windows with flecks of stained glass. "This house is where you will study. You will learn, you will eat, sleep, breathe. This is where we will spend all of our time until I am convinced without a doubt that we are technically perfect and can complete the heist without error or issue. This will of course take several months, so get comfortable. Building relationships here is important." Regulus continues walking into the kitchen. "We are a team, and we need to trust each other almost blindly for this to be successful. To help with this, we will eat every meal together. Breakfast will be here in the kitchen at 7, lunch at noon, and dinner at 7. 7 in the morning, Barty lets out a dismayed groan as Evan shakes his head mournfully. On weekends, you are free to do as you please. Regulus ignores him, walking through the house as he explains the rules. The house is 3 stories. The first floor holds the common areas such as the library, the kitchen, dining rooms, sitting areas, a piano area, the master bedroom, and other alcoves. The second floor is mainly guest rooms with bathrooms, and the third floor had been converted into large empty studio spaces. Everything in the house was meticulously planned and accounted for, and James had a feeling that Regulus has been working on this project a lot longer than Evan had said. As many rules as Regulus had written in the manila envelope, he has hundreds more now that they are at the hideout. James tries to remember them all as best as possible. Some of them are practical, such as chores that each of them would be responsible for. Who would buy groceries and go to the store for everyone? Who would prepare the meals? Who would clean? These chores were going to be assigned and changed on a rotating basis. However, most of the rules seem harsh and designed to take the fun out of everything. There was to be no drinking or drugs. Regulus wanted everyone to have clear minds and heads. No one was allowed to leave without permission to avoid drawing unnecessary attention to themselves. No contact was allowed with the outside world. They were only allowed to communicate with one another. Classes would take place at 8 in the morning every morning. They would be led by Regulus, and they were mandatory. No relationships were permitted among group members, absolutely no sex either. Regulus thought that it would only complicate things. James takes a look around the group as Regulus continues rattling off rules. It's becoming apparently evident that everyone is coming to the unspoken agreement to not follow any of them. James grins at this as Marlene rolls her eyes. He can barely keep up with the pace at which things were happening. Regulus sits with them and sets up various accounts for their lives back in England. He hands them all old-fashioned flip phones with the other group members' numbers already saved. He talks them through a lot of processes that make James's brain hurt. Eventually, he shows them all to their respective rooms and gives the rest of the day back to them. It was late afternoon, and he demands they all be up and in the kitchen the next morning at 7 for breakfast. Jet lag be damned. Soon, they all settled into their respective rooms and dispersed accordingly. Evan and Barty raid the kitchen and claim that they will cook dinner for everyone that night. Remus heads straight for the expansive library that was on the first floor. Marlene and Lily go on a long walk around the grounds, and Mary and Peter stay in their rooms, both falling victim to jet lag. Regulus disappears. James sinks to sleep, so he takes a quick shower before joining together with Dorcas to explore the expansive house. It doesn't take long for them to fall into easy conversation, though. James has never had a problem making friends. He enjoys her company immensely. She's soft-spoken and makes little comments about the statues they pass or the floor tiling. Personally, I think this house is massive. What does Regulus do to be able to afford this place? And he's just using it as a hideout, Dorcas says, as they explore a large studio space on the 3rd floor. It's not even like he lives here full time. Evan told me he inherited a ton of money from his parents, James supplies, happy to be discussing Regulus, and even happier that he wasn't the first person to bring him up. Maybe it's their house? Maybe, Dorcas muses, winding her way down the hallway. He's so odd, don't you think? I think he was a cult leader in a past life, the way he just has all of us listening to him. He seems like he knows what he's doing, James responds lightly. Yeah, he seems a bit like a tortured genius type. A tortured genius cult leader. Dorcas smiles at that, and James does too. So, she says after a while, they were almost done exploring all the rooms on the 2nd floor, and we're about to head down to the 1st. I notice you're already friends with Marlene. What's she like? That night passed by like a blur for James. At dinner, he listens to Remus droning on and on about Regulus's library and how there were 1st edition copies of books there. He also listens to Remus's strong complaints that Regulus had annotated in margins of most of his books. In the margins? Could James believe it? Remus believes it's a cardinal sin to write in the margins of books, and he keeps a separate journal to document his thoughts while reading. James knows this because he had bought Remus a few nice journals at Christmas for that purpose last year. Much to James's disappointment, Regulus doesn't show up for dinner that evening. They all sit in the dining room as a group, even though Regulus hadn't requested they start doing that until tomorrow. Conversations between them are all happening in a flurry, with wide eyes and big hand gestures. Barty and Evan make a surprisingly good pasta and salad dish, and while it would pair nicely with wine, they all drink water to appease Regulus on the 1st evening. Classes begin the following day, and no one has any idea what to expect. Upon entering the largest room on the 3rd floor, James notices that it looks different from how it did the day before, when he went snooping around with Dorcas. There are desks there now, from an actual classroom, and they're laid out in rows with paintings that line the walls. Something sits at the front of the room, covered in a sheet and a chalkboard. The spacious room is now a fully functioning classroom. Regulus walks in behind them and closes the door. He's wearing a black shirt and black pants, and James follows his movements with his eyes shamelessly, unable to look away. Hello everyone, welcome to the 1st day of instruction. For the first half, we'll keep it pretty easy and light. I want to focus on accents. We are in America now, it's time to speak as the Americans do. Oh no. That way, when we are out in public, it'll be easier to blend in. If someone hears us, they'll think we're American. An English accent is too unique and an easy identifier. James looks at Lily, who's already furiously copying down notes, and does his best not to laugh. Right, who can give me an American accent? Regulus looks around the room, eyes scanning everyone carefully. Before he registers what he's doing, James's hand shoots up in the air, and Regulus's eyes land on him before he gives a slight nod. Go ahead, let's hear it then. Despite never ever attempting an American accent before, James opens his mouth and does his best, which evidently isn't very good based on everyone else's laugh. That was definitely more like a German Matthew McConaughey, Peter whispers to him with a grin. Valiant effort, James, Regulus deadpans before turning around to begin with the lecture. There are many kinds of accents in the United States. Southern accents that differ by region, Long Island accents, and something called a Minnesotan accent. Regulus says, for ease, they should all practice a standardised American accent. Class that day goes by quickly, and soon they all find themselves falling into a well-established routine. James spends every second desperately trying to get Regulus to notice him, but every attempt seems to go unnoticed. Regulus puts them all through a grinding and gruelling process with classes too. They all take copious notes and review them in their free time. They ask questions, they pay attention. Regulus is extremely meticulous and demanding, and constantly leaves the entire group scrambling to keep up with his standards. They do most of the training together. They go outside some days and practice self-defense and hand-to-hand combat, which was always a favourite of Barty's, and secretly, James enjoys it as well. They go through millions of slides projected on the walls, while Regulus tries to explain to all of them what exactly the artistic eye is. Just because a painting is larger doesn't always mean it's the most valuable. You have to look at who the artist is, how many works they created in their lifetime, and if it was the first of its kind stylistically. Regulus also tries to impress upon them the importance of not stealing the most famous works. The Starry Night, which valued extremely high, wouldn't be able to sell as a stolen painting because it was too recognisable. The risk would be too great. They sit through lectures from Dorcas, who gives watered-down accounts of common security systems and how to avoid being identifiable in cameras, and watch Barty and Evan demonstrate how to load a gun before they get to try it out themselves. All of these things fascinate James endlessly, and he soaks up as much as he can. Well, he tries to anyway. But Regulus is so distracting. The way he speaks, the way he smiles slightly when someone gets an answer right or makes an astute observation. James drinks in every single second of it. He's actually in the process of formulating a plan of his own to ask Regulus out on a super informal date somehow, as informal as going out with a criminal mastermind who also happens to be your boss can be. Regulus is elusive, and it's easy to hide when the house is as large as it was. The only time anyone ever sees him is when he's teaching lessons or at one of the mandatory community meals. Regulus is hardly ever present on the weekends, and it's not like James can just ask him to do something in front of everyone else. Not to mention that Remus is already teasing him mercilessly, claiming that he has the hots for the teacher whenever James stares too long at Regulus or stumbles over his words. James doesn't think that it's a fair assessment, considering he had the hots for Regulus way before he became their teacher. James, you can come up here and help with Peter's demonstration. It was a demand from Regulus, not a question, and James snaps out of his daydream for a moment, mind racing. What had they just been discussing? Right, common bullet entry zones on the human body. James makes his way up to the front of the class, where Regulus and Peter are standing. Okay, Peter begins. James stands at the front of the class, flashing his award-winning grin to Marlene, who rolls her eyes playfully. For this demonstration, I'm going to show you what a bullet hole wound would look like upon entering the body and what it would look like upon exit. Furthermore, you're all going to tell me what vital organ, if any, would be struck based on where I draw the bullet wound. The rest of the group nods, flipping over the notes they were taking on Peter's lecture. Great. James, if you could just remove your shirt, please, Peter asked politely. He speaks with the calm, steady voice of a doctor, factual and slightly removed, but not unemotional. James does feel for a moment like he is at the doctor's office being examined. Right here in front of everyone. James grins once more, not at all mad at the prospect of showing Regulus everything he could have. Yes, I hope that's okay. Regulus and I will be drawing the entry and exit wounds with marker on you. It washes off instantly in the shower, Peter explains with a tight smile. Sure, Pete, James shrugs, pulling his shirt off over his head. Fine by me. Woo, take it off, Marlene cheers loudly, while Remus lets out the loudest wolf whistle. Even Mary, not one for the class's usual antics, cackles maniacally while cheering. James never had a problem with how he looked. He was never embarrassed by his body, which was good, because being awkward as tall and as strong as he was would surely be a recipe for disaster. He waggles his eyebrows to the class and flexes obnoxiously. All right, that's enough of that, Regulus says a little sharper than usual. He was very deliberately trying to stare only at James's face. Peter, let's get started. James stands at the front of the class with his arms outstretched as Peter and Regulus both uncap their markers. He's hyper-aware of Regulus's position behind him as he waits silently for the demonstration to begin. So here, Peter draws a small circle on his torso just under one of his lungs. It's important to note the difference between entry and exit wounds. An entry wound is small, and only a limited amount of blood would seep out. There will be a ring around it, known as the abrasion ring, that will be red and irritated. Believe it or not, this could actually be one of the best case situations. Peter nods to Regulus, and James feels him crouching slightly behind him. Regulus is so close that James can feel his breath on his skin. He places a steady and cold hand on James's back as he draws the exit wound carefully on the other side. James feels his skin light up with goosebumps and gets a feeling that Regulus is being unnecessarily delicate with him. His hand is cold, but it stings like fire, a flame lapping up his skin ever so softly, so tenderly, and igniting every nerve. Each ring on Regulus's finger, a fiery kiss. James can't even feel the marker on his skin, it's just Regulus. Sorry, my hands are cold, Regulus whispers, so quietly James could have imagined it. He just shakes his head in response, unable to speak. So, Peter's cheerful voice brings him out of his daze, and just as soon as Regulus's hand had been there, on his skin, it was gone. "James, if you turn around, please." And James obliges, turning around so the class can admire Regulus's handiwork. He stands face to face with Regulus, who's looking at him with an indecipherable expression. James was larger than Regulus, so most of his body obscured Regulus's frame from the rest of the class, shielding him from their looks. Regulus isn't making eye contact with James, though. Instead, he's staring down at the small circle Peter had drawn on James's body, and slowly, as softly as he can. He raises his hand and traces the outline of the marker with his index finger. It takes James all he has not to collapse under the touch. He has certainly stopped breathing, and an involuntary shudder of delight racks through him. Then, suddenly, as if Regulus becomes fully aware of what he's doing, he retracts his hand quickly, like a recoil, and takes a step back. "This exit wound looks like it caused a lot of damage, right? Look at the size of the exit hole compared to the front." Peter grabs James's shoulders and manoeuvres him back and forth. "There's going to be extruding tissue here, no abrasion ring, and a great deal of blood. Think profuse." James doesn't like to think about the probability of him being shot. He doesn't like thinking about anyone in this room getting shot and bleeding profusely. A painting was great, sure, he could recognise that, but it was certainly not worth shooting anyone over. He looks at Regulus and wonders if he would agree with that. Something told him he probably wouldn't. Most of the time, a bullet will travel in a straight line through the body, but if it hits a bone, the trajectory of the bullet is very unpredictable. The shattered bone fragments can also cause catastrophic effects. For the sake of today's practice, we're going to assume the bullet travelled straight through. Can anyone tell me what organ was hit? "His liver?" Marlene says questioningly before becoming more confident. "Yeah, his liver." "Definitely his spleen," Evan calls out before high-fiving Barty. "Right on, mate. Dr. Evan Rosier is in the building," Barty adds. "No, I think his stomach," Lily calls out. "Yeah, his stomach for sure," Mary agrees with a quick nod. "It is his stomach," Peter clarifies. "Very good." "Oh, whatever. It's not like anyone is going to be shot like this, and it certainly wouldn't be Money Boy James, would it?" Marlene slumps down in her seat and grumbles. "If anyone is getting shot, it would be me or Remus." "Ah, you'll get the next one, Marlene," Remus coos, not at all seeing by the idea he could be shot. "I could so be shot," James returns like a child. He wasn't sure why he was arguing this. He actually would not like to be shot, in case he hasn't made that clear. I mean, it's possible. He wants everyone to know he's just as brave as Marlene is. He could take a bullet if he needed to. He wouldn't be happy about it, but he could do it. "No," Regulus says quickly, causing everyone to look at him. But this time, Regulus was finally looking at James. "I think we're going to take a break from this today. We'll pick it back up another time. James, put your shirt on." James likes the class days where they are all together. It's nice, and he's pleasantly surprised at how easily he gets along with everyone. Remus claims it's because James always sees the best in everyone. That's how he was able to make friends so easily. It was just who he is. There are, however, days when they train separately. Remus and Marlene have part-time jobs working at a local art museum as security guards. Regulus claims it's so they can get a base-level knowledge of how security in an art museum works, how they operate, what routes guards take, and what to look for. This isn't the museum they are planning to steal from, but this was practical insider knowledge that Regulus demanded they have. When Remus and Marlene are away, the others meet without them, discussing minimal things that the other two could afford to miss. Sometimes Regulus sends them off to do other work separately. When that happens, Dorcas works on top-secret projects for Regulus, which James was extremely jealous of, because it meant Dorcas Meadows had access to a computer and to Regulus Black. Evan and Barty often go off doing God knows what, and James often catches Peter practicing sutures on bananas. Sometimes Regulus promises James that he will get to work through financial assets and accounts soon, but that is the extent of James's usefulness for the time being. During these times, he would wander through the house by himself, peeking into empty corners and staring at the paintings on the wall. Many of them seemed to be family portraits, all of painted figures looking stern and imposing, and they had similar dark features to Regulus. James was in the process of wandering around when he hears Mary's bright laugh coming from one of the rooms upstairs, and he decides to follow it. He goes down the long corridor until he comes to an open door. When Lily sees him out the corner of her eye, she waves him in. James quickly treads through the doorway and looks around in awe. The room is large, with giant windows that bring in streams of natural light. There are canvases and half-finished paintings everywhere. Easels, tubes of paint, brushes, and a various assortment of other things are placed around the room in an organised manner. Frames and blank canvases of different sizes are stacked up against one another in piles leaning against the wall. Lily and Mary appear to have several projects going on at once, and James can see the little projects of unfinished creations scattered about the room. "So, this is what you two do when we don't have class," James smiles. "Been keeping this place a secret." "It's incredible, isn't it?" Lily sighs, looking at James. "I mean, everything we could possibly ever think of is in this room." Her long red hair is pulled back in a bun away from her face and held in place with a paintbrush. "It's like a museum-level conservation room," Mary agrees, working intently on a painting. James can't tell what it is yet. There are just violet brushstrokes in the bottom corner of the canvas, and nothing more. Eagerly, the girls begin wrapping him into their conversation, discussing the intricacies
Over
of their
here,
work.
we're trying different
The entire
processes to
room
age
has a
the
sharp
canvas.
but not
We
entirely
bleached it
unpleasant
first.
smell.
Don't worry,
And
we
Lily
diluted
informs
the
James
bleach,
that it's
Mary
something
puts
called
in, like this is
turpentine.
something James would know to be concerned about. If Dorcas is quiet in her self-assuredness and confidence, Mary is certainly more like Marlene and James, bold and unafraid to be wrong. James loves this about her. James relates to that. "Yes," Lily continues, "that gives the canvas a brittle texture. Then we're going to soak it in umber," that's brown paint, "and thinner." Mary also wants to add cigarette butts soaked in water to the canvas, but I think coffee grounds would be much better. We're experimenting with both now to see how they look. "These are for the more modern canvases, of course," Mary begins, acting as if this information was common knowledge. "Anything before the 1920s is more difficult to age and replicate." Lily nods along as Mary speaks. "For the paintings that require older canvas, we're better off stripping the paint from a previously existing artwork. Regulus has a bunch of old paintings over there," Mary gestures vaguely towards the back of the room, "and some more in another room. I guess he picked them up from galleries and auctions. They're relatively inexpensive that way, considering the artists aren't well known, and the subject matter is flat at best." Yes, Mary has no qualms about stripping the paint to get a good canvas, but it always makes me a bit sad. Just because the artwork wasn't great doesn't mean it didn't have value to a person at one point. I mean, someone a long time ago spent a great deal of time on that painting, and here we are just destroying it and painting right over it. If Lily had her way, we'd all be hoarders of the mundane. Mary shakes her head, smiling at Lily fondly. I've learned she gets very sentimental about things. Train tickets and bookmarks and plane tickets too. They all have feelings. Out with the old and in with the new, I say. Pigments are also incredibly important. I'd argue the most important, but Mary disagrees, Lily continues on excitedly. Because artists can always mix their own paints, it's possible that commercially produced paints were too expensive for working artists, especially when dealing with anything pre-post-impressionism. I think that accounts for plausible deniability and room for error, Mary interjects again. James follows Lily about the large room and tries to take in the information that she is telling him. He loves listening to both of the girls talk. They're so knowledgeable and dedicated to their work that James finds himself excited about it too, despite not knowing anything about it at all. Their genuine love and passion for what they were doing was electrifying, and James is more than content to remain a silent witness to it all. Anyway, take Salvador Dali for instance. Lily gestures to a painting hanging on the wall of a woman who is comprised of spheres against a blue background. James contemplates it with a slight head tilt. This is a fake, but when you try to replicate a Dali painting, you have to think about the paints that he used. So we know that he was in Europe, he used Lafranc and Bourgeois oils, and when he was in America, he used Grumbacher oils. Because this painting was done in the summer of 1952, we can assume he was in Europe and got the proper pigments. Dali was only ever in America long enough to create paintings during the winter months, Mary adds from where she has resumed painting. And finally, we have to crack the painting a bit. We do that by mixing oil and water textures that crack upon hardening. Sometimes you can mix it with the paint if you want it to look really old and flaky, and then you normally run some very diluted umber over that whole thing to fill the cracks. It makes the painting look like it's acquired a lot of dust and dirt over the years, and then you varnish it and boom, you've got yourself an aged painting. Of course, there are other more complex processes we do in between steps we didn't cover, things we have to do to age the wood and frames, and how to make sure the paint doesn't appear or smell too fresh, but that would take all day if we got into the minute details. Mary waves her hands around. Wow, James breathes out after the grand tour finishes. This is incredible. He takes another turn about the room and notices the table of solvents and half-stripped canvases that have been abandoned, the paintings on the wall ranging from landscape scenes to portraits to abstract works, frames and wood cutouts, canvas half-nailed to their stretchers, and little drips of paint everywhere. It really is the coolest thing I've ever gotten to do, Mary gushes. I don't know why Regulus is so intent on a heist. Honestly, Lily and I could live and work out of here and generate fakes to sell at auction for major money. I'd be happy spending my whole life doing that. Lily's eyes widen, imagining the prospect. James could see her creating fake provenance for a piece, working on a Pollock drip painting and selling it at Sotheby's. What a life that would be. Yes, but then you're left with nothing but the cash. Once you pawn off the fake painting, what do you have to show for it? James muses out loud. I have $1 million more than I did before, Mary returns questioningly as Lily nods in agreement. No, James shakes his head. It's not just about the money. The heist is about, well, it's about standing in the same place Van Gogh was when he painted those sunflowers, right? You're standing there, looking not at a painting, but at a window. Each brushstroke was done by a man in 1887, and you are witnessing the tender care and curiosity he put into every petal, and staring at the same vase he looked at for hours while he tried to get it just right. And then, James was stumbling through his speech, trying to explain it to himself more than anything. And then it's about being able to reach out and pluck it off the wall. All those thoughts, those feelings, those hours of gentle patience and observation, those visuals are no longer trapped in 1887, but they're right there in your hands, and they're coming with you. They're coming with you to the present, to the modern day, and so there you are, as one person with all the magic, right in your hands, collapsing the past into the present. I couldn't have said it better myself. A smooth voice makes James spin around. Regulus is leaned nonchalantly up against the doorway with his arms crossed. His eyes look at James with admiration as he smiles at him slightly. Just the corners of his mouth twitch up, but James feels his heart soar in his chest. But you're still left with nothing. I don't understand. It's not like you get to keep the original painting. We're still selling that, so at the end of the day, in both cases, you're still only left with money. Maybe, Regulus answers wryly. Or maybe you're left with the knowledge of that magic moment, as James called it. That knowledge that you brought the past and present together. That for a brief moment, you opened a portal to another time. You held it in your hands, and you claimed it as your own. Mary frowns slightly as if she still isn't buying it entirely, but that's okay with James. He knows that Regulus is on the same page as him, that those moments of adrenaline, those moments of magic are what makes the heist worth it, not the money or the notoriety that would follow, just those few quiet seconds where you pull the past into the present, you do the impossible, and you prove to yourself that you can. You two seem to be making wonderful progress, Regulus praises the girls as he looks around the room. Remember, I'm running everything you do under UV light when you're done, though. Mary lets out a little groan of annoyance, and Lily nods quickly. James, Regulus turns to him, and James stands up a little taller. Can I speak with you outside? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. James quickly makes his way to the door, giving a quick wave to the girls before following Regulus down the hall. He seems almost unsure of where he's leading James, and ducks quickly into an empty room. I know things haven't been the most exciting for you recently, Regulus begins, as James tries hard not to laugh. Standing across from Regulus like this in an empty room was the most exciting thing that has ever happened to him. I'm sorry about that, but you've been doing really well, and I know you haven't gotten a chance to even leave the house yet. Regulus is twisting one of the rings on his finger over and over again. If James didn't know any better, he would say that Regulus was nervous. I need to go to a museum in a few days, and I was wondering if you'd like to go with me. James blinks a few times rapidly. He's trying very quickly to process what Regulus is saying, but for some reason, the synapses in his brain were refusing to fire. To get out of the house and to help with the heist. It's a heist-related outing, Regulus explains quickly. You want me to go with you? James spits out, dazed. Now it's Regulus's turn to blink a few times. When he speaks again, his tone is different, stiffer. Well, if you don't want to go, that's fine. I can ask Dorcas if she... No. James interrupts quickly. No, I mean, yes, I want to go. I would really like to go. I just mean that I don't really know how. I don't know a lot about art, so I'm not sure how useful I would be if... James began rapidly trying to salvage the situation. James, you know plenty about art if your speech from before was anything to go on. Regulus seems to relax slightly. You'll be fine. This is a very low-pressure situation. He smiles so brightly that Regulus feels like he needs sunglasses just to look at him. It's a date. James looks at Regulus carefully with a bit of mischief in his eyes. It's a work outing between people who work together, Regulus quickly corrects in a flat tone. Which is why you asked me alone in a room, alone when no one would hear, and where we'd be alone, right? James continues, undeterred. Did I mention the alone part? Regulus opens his mouth and then closes it very quickly. Sometimes, he says quietly, I like to be a little dramatic. Don't let it get to your head. Then he spins around quickly and walks out, leaving James staring after him yet again. It's too bad James is never exceptionally great at following directions.